In the middle of 1940, Hitler was at the absolute peak of his power. His armies had just blitzed across Europe, and it really seemed like nothing could stop them. But fast forward just 5 years, and the Third Reich is in absolute ruins. So the big question is, how did it all go so wrong for him? So, with pretty much all of Europe under his boot, Hitler just expected the last nation standing, Great Britain, to ask for a peace deal. But Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, well, he had other ideas. This speech made it totally clear. There would be no treaty, the war was on. And this really is the core question, right? Think about it. Germany was this military juggernaut. They were allied with Italy, and they even had a peace pact with the Soviet Union, so their eastern border was secure. Even the United States wanted absolutely no part in this war. So, what changed? How did this unstoppable tide get turned back? Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll look at 6 key stages, from Hitler's total domination of Europe to the very first cracks that started to show over Britain, then that fatal gamble in the Soviet Union, America's dramatic entry into the war, and finally how the walls just closed in, leading to the fall of the Third Reich. So let's just paint a picture here. It is July 1940. Austria, Poland, Denmark, France, Belgium, you name it, they've all fallen to the German war machine. Hitler's buddy, Mussolini, he's got Italy locked down. Europe is, for all intents and purposes, a Nazi fortress. And here's the crucial part. Hitler felt totally secure. That non-aggression pact he signed with Stalin, it meant he didn't have to worry about a war on 2 fronts, a classic military nightmare. And that allowed him to focus all of his incredible military might on just one single target, that defiant little island of Great Britain. Hitler's plan to invade Britain was called Operation Sea Lion, but there was one very big, very wet obstacle: the English Channel. The British Royal Navy was just too powerful for a direct assault by sea, so Hitler knew he had to control the skies first. And just look at these numbers. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, had a jaw-dropping advantage, almost 4 times as many planes as Britain's Royal Air Force. I mean, on paper, this should have been a cakewalk for Germany. But then came September 15th, 1940, a day now known as Battle of Britain Day. Hitler ordered this massive, all-out attack to finally break them. And this chart shows you exactly what happened. The smaller RAF didn't just survive, they wiped the floor with the Luftwaffe, inflicting more than double the losses. It was such a blow that Hitler had to call off the invasion for good. So, how on earth did they do it? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle was motivation. When you're defending your own home, your own country from an invader, you just fight differently. We've seen a pretty incredible modern example of this with Ukraine's resistance. For those British pilots, this was literally a fight for their homes. But it wasn't just spirit. They also had a secret weapon, a much better radar system, which gave them early warnings. That combo of heart and tech handed Hitler his first major defeat of the war. So after failing to take Britain, Hitler made his next, and you could argue his biggest mistake. He was driven by this intense hatred of communism, and this just megalomaniacal belief that he needed the vast lands of the Soviet Union for Germany to be a true superpower. So he decided to tear up his peace treaty with Stalin and invade. The plan was codenamed Operation Barbarossa, and it was absolutely massive. He split his forces into 3 enormous army groups. Each one had its own major objective: Leningrad up in the north, the capital Moscow right in the center, and the resource-rich fields of Ukraine in the south. Now, at first, the German Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War, was just as devastating as it had been in the rest of Europe. But the Soviets had 3 game-changing advantages. First, the brutal Russian winter, something the German forces were totally unprepared for. Second, Stalin had signed his own non-aggression pact with Japan, so he felt safe enough to move his battle-hardened troops from Siberia all the way west to fight the Germans. And finally, they now had an alliance with Britain, which started sending them vital supplies. So while Hitler is getting bogged down in the snows of the Soviet Union, a single event on the complete other side of the planet was about to change absolutely everything. It was about to wake up a sleeping giant. On December 7th, 1941, Germany's ally, Japan, launched a shocking surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Up to this point, America was dead set on staying out of the war. But this attack, killing over 2,300 Americans, well, it ended that neutrality overnight. The United States officially entered World War II. So now you have the Soviets pushing back hard in the east, And you have the industrial might of America thrown into the fight. The tide had well and truly turned. This is the part of the story where all of Hitler's big mistakes really start to catch up with him, and the cracks in his fortress Europe begin to shatter. And nowhere was this turn more dramatic than in the city of Stalingrad. The fight for this city became this unbelievably brutal, grinding battle, and it's widely seen as the single most important turning point of the war in Europe. For the German army, it was an absolute catastrophe. Just let this number sink in. After months of some of the deadliest fighting in all of human history, an entire German army, almost 300,000 soldiers, was trapped and forced to surrender. The myth of German invincibility was just gone, shattered, forever. At the same time the German army was bleeding to death at Stalingrad, another front was starting to fall apart. Over in Italy, Hitler's main ally was facing its own internal collapse. An anti-fascist movement was rising up, led by partisans, basically regular civilians who took up arms to fight back against Mussolini's regime. And here is a really cool piece of trivia. You've probably heard the song Bella Ciao, right? Maybe from the show Money Heist? Well, its origins are right here. It started as an anthem for those very Italian partisans fighting for their freedom. It's just a powerful reminder of how culture and resistance can be so deeply connected. And then came the final decisive hammer blow. With Germany already on the ropes on the Eastern Front, the Allies launched D-Day. It was the largest seaborne invasion in history. Over 150,000 troops stormed the beaches of Normandy and France, opening up that second front that Hitler had always been terrified of. He was now trapped, fighting a massive, hopeless war on two sides. His resources were stretched to the absolute breaking point. With Germany now being squeezed between two massive advancing armies, the end came with just astonishing speed. The final months of the Third Reich saw the complete collapse of what was once the most feared military in the world. This timeline of the last few months just shows how fast it all fell apart. By February of 45, the Allied leaders were already meeting at Yalta to figure out what to do with Germany after the war. Just 2 months later, with Soviet tanks in the streets of Berlin, Hitler killed himself. And a week after that, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The end of the war wasn't just about the fighting stopping. It completely reshaped our world. Germany was split in two, the map of Europe was totally redrawn, and new global institutions like the United Nations were created for the specific purpose of making sure a catastrophe like this could never, ever happen again. In fact, that early economic cooperation between old enemies like France and Germany planted the seeds for what we now know as the European Union. So in the end, it wasn't just one thing, but a whole cascade of failures. Underestimating an opponent's will to fight, the sheer arrogance of invading the Soviet Union, and then finally being crushed between the might of two superpowers. The world that rose from those ashes was changed forever. And it really makes you wonder, which of the lessons learned in those final terrible months are we still dealing with today?